My name is Barry McGuckin. As Marcel introduced me earlier, I'm the General Manager for Food Innovation Australia and the Innovation Manager for Food Innovation Australia, and I'm on the steering committee for GTAG. And I have the opportunity today to host the panel session. We have quite a broad set of topics for our expert panel this afternoon. We've got looking at patient safety, traceability of medicines. What does the 2D barcodes mean for government and things like biosecurity and emergency response? How does it relate to public safety and certification for the building and construction industry? What does it mean to consumers? So quite a diverse, eclectic range today. So let's move into the panel. And to do that, first I'm going to introduce our panelists. We've all met Michael just now, but our next panelist is James. And James has worked in community pharmacy and has been an accredited home medicines review pharmacist and has worked in clinical hospital pharmacy as an assistant director of pharmacy overseeing inventory and information systems, and has had statewide roles to improve Queensland health digital ecosystem. Our next panelist is Paul Hanson, who's the director of PBS Payment Task Force for the Australian Government Department of Health and Aged Care. Paul, that needs a shorter title. It's too hard to say. It needs an acronym. He's a compliance and regulatory expert with almost 30 years in policy and operationals experience across multiple federal government agencies and is currently overseeing the design and development of Australia's government national medical medicines traceability framework. So welcome, Paul. Our next panelist is Jessica Fernley, the Industry Development Manager for Horticulture New South Wales at DPI. Jessica joined the New South Wales DPI in 2019 and has been working in many areas of crop production and supply chain research in temperate fruits. As the cherry industry lead, Jess works with growers across New South Wales to improve crop yield. And she leads the Cherry Plus Traceability Project, a collaboration between Food Agility CRC, Woolworths and cherry growers in Australia. Our next panelist is Brett Hyland, who's the Engagement Manager at NATA, Australia's Laboratory Accreditation Authority. And he's got a broad perspective to safety and compliance matters, as he has a career that's included laboratory management, certification delivery, and technical management of accreditation across a wide range of industries. And our final panelist today is Chanel Day, who has spent over 20 years in retail in a number of leadership roles spanning business development, analytics, strategy, consulting, and most recently as the Executive Manager for Fresh and Packed Foods at Quantum. So welcome to everybody on our panel. To the panelists, let's start with some questions. So James, first to you. As a pharmacist and informatician, what are some of the key areas where change to 2D barcodes on medicines will improve both clinical and patient perspective? And do you see other opportunities? So two-barrel question for you up front.
Thanks very much, Barry. Look, Michael's keynote on the Aspen Australia's journey was great to hear and covered many of the manufacturing and regulatory reasons to move to 2D barcodes. Through my lens of applied ordering, dispensing, administration of medications, the starting point is that 2D barcodes mean far greater data density than what we can get on linear codes, which leads to increased accessibility to that data because it's on the medications that the supply chain, the clinicians, and the patients all use. That accessible data provides safeguards for the safe and appropriate use of medications because machine-readable 2D barcodes can be used to provide aspects of checking that a computer is just far better equipped to handle than a person and greatly increase the speed at which data can be entered into a computer system. As a local example, with the rollout of COVID-19 vaccinations through Queensland Health Clinics, we tested both person-entered vaccine data at the point of administration, as well as machine-read data through 2D barcodes. When a person was tasked with the need to enter the vaccine's batch number and expiry, along with confirming it was the right brand and dose of vaccine for the patient in front of them, it would add 10 to 20 seconds to their process. And typos or omissions on batch and expiry information were pretty common. When all these data points were encoded into a 2D barcode, data entry took less than 1 second, typos were non-existent, omissions were far fewer, and ultimately clinics could vaccinate more people per day. These barcodes create a connection between the physical and digital worlds. A lot of the safety and monitoring benefits of digital health where I work are made available through these connections, recording what actually was used and documenting it quickly and accurately. For patient care and medication safety, the encoding of a handful of key data points in a 2D barcode enables several computerized safety and appropriateness checks. In a space of less than 1 square centimeter, a 2D barcode can fit over 2,300 characters. That's more than enough space to encode the medication name or its value, its batch number, the expiry, ideally a serial number, and maybe even an online reference with expanded medicines information, as Marcel mentioned, with the new GS1 digital link format. When scanned, this standard data can be used by clinicians in clinics or in hospitals to confirm that the medication in their hand is the one that's ordered and intended for the patient in front of them, that it hasn't expired, and even potentially to check if there are any active recalls on that batch. And all of that can happen automatically. No extra time spent to gain that value. The same benefits are available to patients taking their own medications at home, with the prevalence of smartphones as mentioned, or for guardians giving medications to those people in their care. A challenge does exist that by and large, these barcodes are only on the outer packaging of the medication. So for many reasons, the outer packaging of the medicine can be discarded and only the falls or the blisters remain. So just a sample here, I've just whited out the branding on this. I'm sure it's a good quality aspirin brand, but branding is irrelevant here. This is about a national standard we want to move to. So in hospital and clinical practice, the workflow is to retrieve the dose that you need for the patient in front of you now and go to the patient bedside and administer it. As such, the outer packaging with that machine readable barcode isn't available when you're actually with the patient. Having as many medications as possible packed into a single unit dose, like 1 tablet per foil bubble, with a 2D barcode on each of those doses, offers the best chance to always have that beneficial computer readable information at the time it can make the most difference, often at administration, but also at key safety checks throughout the journey. Props to Kent for mentioning this in the Q&A, and it's interesting to hear Michael's points on aggregation as well. We ultimately want to have machine readable codes at every level here. I want to go deeper down. Michael wants to go further up. It's excellent. Following on from the point of dispense authentication model that Michael mentioned and raised in the QA regarding the genuine product checking, as a pharmacist, my professional indemnity insurance can become void if I found I dispensed a product and made a mistake and I didn't use a scan check as part of my dispensing process. We have to do it. So to loop back to the question posed, 2D barcodes facilitate computerized decision support to assist the people undertaking medications management, because both the people and the software understand the medication that's involved. Barcodes mean faster entry of key medication data points with higher accuracy, which in turn leads to a richer digital representation of what's physically happened, that then leads to improved safety features for clinicians and patients alike, as well as a bigger base on which to run medication analytics for quality and safety, supply chain surety, and the optimal use of medicines purposes. I'd really like to see Australia move more towards unit dose packaged medications with a 2D barcode on each dose to really unlock some potential here. Thanks again for the double barrel question, Barry, and back to you.
Thanks. Great answer. I really like the fact that there is safety, accuracy, and that shared knowledge that goes all the way across the supply chain so that everybody is more informed and people aren't dropping out, and you can connect the dots all the way through. So thank you, James. Sticking with the medical theme, Paul, a question to you on traceability of medicines in Australia. They've been a topic locally for some time, and your team held a consultation earlier this year. Obviously, there are still some steps to that process that need to be completed, but can you provide us with any updates related to the process? And two-part question for you as well. Are there any key findings that you can share with us so far?
Good morning. Thank you. We did provide a targeted consultation with the supply chain industry late last year, early this year. Obviously, from a government point of view, one of our key focuses in this area is about supply chain resilience. The last couple of years have really kind of highlighted the fact that the supply chain, for a number of different supply chains, particularly pharmaceutical, really is a bit of a haphazard model in terms of visibility of where medicines are at any particular time in Australia. And given that Australia is a very large geographic country, You may have an oversupply in one area, but you may have an undersupply in others, and we just don't know at this time. So that's really why the government is looking into this issue, is really around making sure that the medicine supply chain is resilient, to ensure it has its integrity, and to make sure that we can get medicines to people when they need them, and we know where the shortages are and we can intervene if we need to. In terms of what stakeholders told us, is that essentially they can see the public health benefits, they can see the business benefits. What they want to know is the next level of detail, which is what particular model we're going to do, whether or not we are going to, say, follow the European model, which is very much a point of entry, point of dispense model. We're going to look to do a full model that is a full track and trace through all participants in the supply chain, or something that is a hybrid. There's a few different models that are around the globe. So for instance, the US is doing something completely different, where they just doing standards and then leaving it to the private sector to run their own databases and things. And participants also wanted to know what the time frame was and what assistance there might be from government in terms of cost. So they're the kind of things that we're still working through, and we'll be looking to hopefully come out and do some more consultation with industry in the next little while to actually start to work through some of those issues.
Paul, just to help those of us who might not be familiar with the traceability systems, the point of entry versus full track and trace, what's the difference between those two models?
So point of entry is really when your medicine comes online into your national supply chain. So in Australia, most medicines are imported, more than 95% are imported into Australia. So entry to the Australian supply chain is really at the point of import by the medicine sponsor. And then your point of dispensing obviously is when it's actually given to a patient, either by a community pharmacy or by a hospital. And so essentially in the European model, you have point of entry where the medicine sponsor provides the data for the medicines, in terms of provides your baseline data to measure against. And then when it's dispensed, it's checked against that data to make sure that it's genuine, and to also take it off the system that's actually being given out. A full track and trace would actually mean that every entity that handled that medicine or took possession of that medicine would actually then be required to essentially scan in and scan out to record that they've received it. And then when they're sending it out, they're sending it on. So that would basically mean that not only would it be the medicine sponsor when they imported it, it would then be the distributors, it would then be potentially 2 or 3 layers of distributors, then it'd be public and private hospitals then receive it, and then when it's finally given to a patient as well. And that's a full track and trace, where you actually know where the medicine is at every location that it's actually handled throughout the supply chain. And as I said, there's different approaches around the globe, and that's kind of something that we're looking at the moment.
Thank you, and thank you for helping us understand more about where we might be heading to. Do you have a time frame as to when there'll be a decision made as to how we will take the approach?
Well, we're hoping that government will make a decision, shortly, in terms of going ahead with this. What that would mean likely is that there will be further rounds of consultation, particularly starting with the supply chain, but then obviously potentially going out to a wider group as well, potentially including consumers, basically to detail out what are the next step, what are the timings on this. If you look at other models around the world, this is normally a very slow process in kind of building these systems out. There's normally a 5 to 6 year kind of rollout strategy. Okay. And that's kind of what we're moving towards.
Thank you. I'll move on to Michael to ask him a question. And thank you for your presentation, Michael. Before I forget, there's been a number of people putting their questions into the Q&A function. Please continue to do that. We're happy to answer that, the questions as they come through. Michael, based on what James and Paul have said, what are your thoughts about the implementation of traceability? You've spoken about your traceability program, and traceability or track and trace for products in the local market.
Thank you. I think the ability for pharmaceutical manufacturers in Australia to print data matrix onto pack, and the development of regulations around that is usually the first important step taken, and that's what we've seen in export markets as well. And this is what Australia has outlined in Therapeutic Goods Order 106, which has been issued by the TGA, which actually commences the 1st of January next year, which sort of provides clarity for early adopters of serialization and data matrix codes on medicines that are to be supplied in Australia. So that TGO 106 does not mandate the use of data matrix codes or serialization of medicines, but it sort of, I guess, says, if you are choosing to do this, this is how you need to do it. The fact that the TGA is also going down the path of a standardized GS1 approach to serialization is, of course, a sensible choice and allows for any manufacturers such as ourselves that have implemented GS1 serialization solutions for global markets to more or less sort of be immediately capable of supplying such medicines to the local market as well. So it's good that, I guess, Australia is, going down like that standardized approach, which is, of course, an enabler for local manufacturers. As I touched on in my presentation and drawing upon examples of the uptake of serialization and traceability in other countries, the adoption of traceability is typically staged in levels of complexity, just due to the fact that the implementation effort is considerable for all stakeholders. So not just for manufacturers like ourselves, but for brand owners, for regulators, and also for the retail or distribution and retail sector as well. So to jump from zero capability to a fully aggregated track and trace system is, I believe, unrealistic to do in sort of one jump due to the entry barriers involved. However, progressing through stages of, firstly, the ability to print data matrix, then moving to serialization at a sales unit level, and then to the reporting of that data to the regulator and through to the retail sector, which closes the loop on authenticity of product. And then finally to the implementation of aggregation, that is the serialization of every packaging unit level and the ability to trace products right through your supply chain and with separate, I guess, milestone dates for each level of implementation, I believe is a more achievable approach. So as Paul touched on before, for the Australian market, I believe the ability to trace where pharmaceuticals are in the supply chain rather than just the anti-counterfeiting and authenticity piece is particular interest and value to Australia. I don't think counterfeit is as big a problem as it is overseas in Australia, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong in that point. So I think really the end goal for Australia really is aggregation, which is, as we understand it, a big undertaking for the sector if looked at its entirety. However, by making a start, by the consultation that's already happening between the TGA and Indian industry, and that continuing collaboration between manufacturers and regulators and distribution and retail, and also importantly by having a standardized, harmonized approach that is using GS1 or global standards, I think it's very achievable and it will create great benefits for the industry, particularly knowing where the pharmaceuticals are, where shortages might be, and sort of supply chain issues, across the Australian sector. So, sorry for the long-winded answer. I hope I answered the question.
There's obviously a lot of insights that you guys have gained in your journey. It's my background and experiences in food production and food distribution, and the similarities are very considerable between the medicine and in food, and harmonized capability in a supply chain and being able to share data and just knowing how to share data is a really key thing. It can simply bring the system undone when there's one missing cog who just isn't able to have that harmonized system. So I think that's a really important key piece of insight. Thank you for that. I'm going to move now out of the pharmaceutical or medical world and into food, which is, as I said, where I'm more familiar. And Jessica, a question for you this time. In recent times, you've been involved with an industry project on 2DBarcodes where they've been used to demonstrate the enhanced end-to-end traceability. And I'm particularly interested in that, knowing a little bit about the fraud that takes place with cherries as we move them to markets. My question to you is, how do you see 2D barcodes could assist regulators and governments in a biosecurity incident, or assure trading partners know that we're free of pests to make sure that the right price is achieved for all of the players? So your thoughts?
Thanks, Barry. And yes, my ears pricked up when Michael and yourself and talking about counterfeit. It is quite a big problem, particularly in the cherry industry, where I mostly spend most of my work, but some horticultural industries in general. So traceability is already quite common in horticulture, but it does have challenges that we're experiencing with integration and understanding data standard agreements. And so this makes it really difficult for governments such as New South Wales DPI, retailers, and the growers to all talk together along the supply chain. So the recent traceability pilot that we undertook as part of New South Wales DPI, Woolworths, Fragility CRC, Cherry Growers Australia, GS1 Australia, and also Fresh Chain Systems, was looking at how we can integrate a data standard to allow us to have efficient and accurate food recalls. We can respond quickly in emergency management scenarios or a biosecurity incursion. So it's a little bit of a mouthful, but what we did was basically use a digital link, so the 2D barcode, and incorporated that with GS1 data standards, and was able to use that to identify property and product in the supply chain. And we're able to do this real time. So with the help of Fresh Chain Systems, this integrated traceability system allowed us to identify product and property in under 60 seconds, which usually food recalls or property identification takes 24 hours sometimes. So it allowed us to see real time where property was, but also provided information on how the product moved through the system. So using our allocated GLNs, we were able to see how long product might have spent in a particular location and where it moves to after the store, so back to the consumer. And the ability to do this then allows us to shut down products and isolate it, and stops us from wasting food and allows us to just take batches away from the supply chain, which was extremely important in horticulture industries. The 2D barcode not only allowed us to connect to property and place in the supply chain, but it allowed growers a direct link to the consumer. On the packing line, we're able to connect what we called a consumer experience to the 2D barcode. And then this allowed a consumer to scan with their smartphone their product, and they were able to receive a video, ingredients and recipe lists, information about the farm. So we're really able to start to educate the consumer at the end of the supply chain. The consumer also was able to provide direct feedback to the grower, so they could rate the product, and then the grower got that in real time. So they were able to see, oh, this consumer in Sydney really liked my cherries because they were nice and crunchy. So that was a really good value add. And I see that being quite a big value add for the industries as well, to try to educate their consumers about their brand and get real-time feedback as well. The second part of your question about that pest access is really close to my body of work in the cherry industry. So cherries are compromised by Queensland fruit fly and native endemic pests. And that prevents us from accessing markets such as the China market or the Vietnamese market without endpoint treatments. So as we're required to do these endpoint treatments, we need to prove that we've done these through paper-based certification. So having plant health certificates or endpoint treatment certificates. The ability to show that we can carry these certificates electronically was one of the main objectives of our pilot trial. And so using GS1 standards and the digital link code, we were able to provide a framework to show that these certificates could be carried electronically. And we hope that in the next iteration of our project that we might be able to actually get someone to approve this at the end of the supply chain and show that these can be carried the whole way through the system without being paper-based, lost, and time consuming for the grower as well. So if you're interested in any of the findings of our project, we've actually got our final report with the publisher literally today as we speak. So I hope to have that published within the next week or two. So if anyone's interested in any of those findings, please, I think Tracy's just popped that in the chat. So please get in touch.
Thank you, Jessica. That's there's a lot of similarities, as I mentioned, between the benefits that you've found with what Michael and James and Paul have already outlined. So the advantages for the 2D barcode seem to be very much cross-sector. So that's really good news. Thank you for your update. And thinking about being able to track across sectors, I'm going to move to Brett from NATA. And Brett, you've got a long history and expertise with the Australian accreditation and regulatory space. What would the implementation of 2D barcodes and the building and construction industry, just to pick something that's not food or medicine, what would it mean for public safety?
Thanks, Barry. Hi, all. I'm interested in public safety in general, but quite happy to zoom in on the construction sector. And it's probably easiest to talk about building products. These are very often imported, as you probably know, and they can have quite complex international supply chain. So what you actually end up with is a bunch of certificates floating about, which can have a pretty unclear relationship to a delivered product. Now that's going to present a problem for the building certifier, at least, and maybe the owner, but also potentially for anyone who ends up working or living in that building. And we hear about these problems in the press pretty frequently. Now, I don't think anyone is suggesting that a barcode on its own is going to solve all of this mess, but for me, it's the physicality of the barcode that's key, since that means that we can definitively identify a physical product, at least down to batch, but there's no reason why we can't go down to particular shipments or deliveries. Now, that's an excellent start, but I'm happy to say that the Australian Building Codes Board wants to go a bit further. So they're recommending that all building products carry a physical marking showing not just the product ID and the batch identification, but also detailed product conformance information. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say you're never going to fit detailed conformance information onto a label, and certainly not a barcode. But of course, you don't have to, as Marcel was explaining earlier on. All you need to do is to provide a link to access such information. And 2D barcodes do allow you to electronically link all relevant conformance information. Now, not only that, but it should be possible to also link to the credentials which attest to the quality of that data by tagging in the accreditation authorities, and that takes things to another level. Perhaps I'll close by noting, though, that what we haven't quite got yet is global interoperability for these systems across different supply chains. And of course, that's exactly where global standards like GS1 come in. And I can say that the third-party product conformity certification space is very active internationally right now. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Brett, just a question. What's so important about being able to confirm the certifier as opposed to the conformance material? Why is that important?
Well, anyone can issue a certificate saying that this product is pretty good, but well, you know, what are their credentials for doing so? Are they competent? Are they independent? Have they been externally judged in this regard? And is the body that was judging them also operating under some global standard, some sort of mutual recognition? And if we're talking about cross-border trade, as we generally are with building products, this these anchors of trust, these global anchors of trust, become very important, and really you would say just as important as the certificate itself, because you need to know what stands behind that certificate.
Yeah, that's very true. So thank you for that. And on the point of trust, that brings me to Chanel. And we as consumers are a fairly untrusting lot. We don't believe many of the claims, but we're increasing, as consumers, we're increasingly wanting to know more about the products we buy and the medicines that are prescribed and the foods we eat, and where's it grown, is it sustainable, etc. So what are the insights about, from a consumer's perspective, about the way that 2D barcodes can be utilised, and what do consumers want? Do we actually know what we want? Your thoughts?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Barry. I wanted to shift everyone's thinking to younger consumers. So millennials, there's about 6.4 million of them in Australia, and they represent about 30% of shoppers here in Australia. So the way these consumers have grown up, the environment they've grown up in very much influences the types of things that they buy and the purchasing choices that they make. They've grown up as digital natives, for example, so they're very comfortable using technology and data. They've also grown up in an environment whereby climate change has been very topical as well. And I apologize, my dog has come into the room, is playing around if there's some background noise, like a toddler. So, you know, this has certainly shaped how younger consumers, millennials, and also the younger emerging shoppers shop. So we know that they're very comfortable searching for products online and actually transacting in the online environment, much more so than older generations. And they do make slightly different category choices as well. So one example would be plant-based foods. So we do see younger shoppers over-indexing in categories like plant-based foods, but under-indexing in categories like meat and seafood. And one really interesting thing we've seen is with respect to loyalty of these younger shoppers. So typically they tend to be not particularly loyal to the types of brands and products that they buy, but we've seen some interesting anomalies. So where products might have, for example, a sustainability claim or a fair trade claim, we've actually seen increased loyalty for younger shoppers to those types of products and brands. So it's a really interesting shopper group when we're starting to think about something digital. Beyond that, there is actually a broader group of consumers that are quite environmentally aware as well. So an eco-conscious shopper, and they can be across any age group. And what we've observed about profiling them is that they can tend to be less price sensitive. So tending to buy less products on promotion, also willing to pay a high price point, you know, for products that do have a sustainability claim. So when it comes to 2D barcodes, I think what's a great opportunity about 2D barcodes is it really gives manufacturers, retailers, suppliers of products the ability to communicate beyond that on-pack real estate that consumers see when they're shopping for a product in a store. It allows you to communicate sort of a broader suite of credentials, such as, you know, was renewable energy used in the production of the product? What was the farming method that was used? I was really interested to hear Jess talk about the cherry industry in particular and traceability. That's a really exciting one. You know, what type of plastic was used, for example, if there's sort of like some fair trade credentials. So it gives the ability to communicate more about the product for consumers that are interested. And I think particularly for younger consumers, it's in a way that they're really comfortable to engage via a digital means. There's been a lot of discussion today with Michael and Jess about traceability and the authentication of products. And I just wanted to share one example from a consumer perspective. And you're probably all aware that over the past decade, there was a fairly large Daigou market that grew up in Australia. So people buying products here in Australia and then shipping them overseas to markets like China. There were a number of scandals in particular in food products and vaccine products for children that actually caused some harm to babies and children in China. So people wanted to make sure that the products that they were buying for their kids were safe to eat and that they were authentic. And that's where the Daigou market really grew from. Infant formula and vitamins are two specific categories, you know, where there was strong demand, and it was such a strong demand that retailers here in Australia actually put buying limits on the number of infant tin formulas that people could buy. Most of those infant formula companies have put some kind of traceability system in place, but one example that I wanted to talk to give a bit more flavour to how consumers are engaging is a program by Danone that they released in 2020. In that particular program, they had like a dual barcode system on for infant formula tins. So on the outside, there was a barcode that could be a code that could be scanned, which identified the location of the manufacturing of the product and then its movement through the supply chain. And if the consumer did purchase and took that product home, they could open up the tin, and then there was a second barcode on the inside, which would then give a one-time authentication code. So I think in particular in markets where there is concern about safety of food and products, and also some concerns around counterfeit, there absolutely is, the consumer is definitely interested in the application of things like 2D barcodes to be able to provide that comfort for them.
Thank you for that. I was talking to somebody recently who wanted to buy a table, and they were wanting to a fairly expensive table, but they were wanting to make sure it wasn't made from Indonesian rainforest. They wanted it to be from fully sustainable. So that, and they wanted to do it on their phone in the store. So we as consumers are changing. If you had one piece of advice for people moving to 2DBarcodes who are looking for that consumer interface, what would you say something is that's key for them in essentially a market proposition or a value proposition with using the 2DBarcodes and their consumer interface?
Yeah, I think certainly being able to communicate the credentials from a sustainability, fair trade perspective are critical. And I think it's not the same for all products and in all markets. So I think the key thing would be to actually measure the results of any kind of program that you implement, and then move and make decisions from there. So a fact-based decision-making based on data rather than an intuition-based decision-making set without data to back you up. So essentially, when it comes to working with consumers, you want to understand what's the result in terms of that translating to sales. And not all consumers are the same. Some shoppers in some categories will have a greater desire for traceability, sustainability, but it won't necessarily be all consumers in all environments. So I think use data to inform your decisions.
Okay, thank you. We've come to the end of our panel session as such, and we're going to now open up to any remaining questions from those of you that have joined to listen in today. I notice, well, as far as I can tell, there are no questions in the Q&A and no questions in the chat function, which often happens. So unless somebody has a burning question, I'm going to throw back to each of the panelists and ask them for their headline piece of advice. Knowing what you know now and the journey that you've been on with 2DBarcodes, if you were to open up the newspaper tomorrow and you were given the opportunity to put a headline in, what would you say has been your number one learning or your number one benefit from going on the 2DBarcode? And we might as well, we'll go backwards up the panels. So we will start with Chanel.
Yeah, I think my headline would be information is power. So the 2DBarcodes allow you to track, trace, monitor, and analyze much more data than has been possible in the past. And I think that absolutely does have the ability to transform efficiency in the marketplace, efficiencies for businesses, and then also more information to enable consumers as well. So information is power.
Information is power. Thank you very much. Brett.
There was a headline that appealed to me in the Financial Review a little while back, which said Australia needs smarter barcodes. So I think that's probably as good a headline as any. But I would just add one other aspect. Data carriers like barcodes come and go. I mean, they come and go very slowly. The original barcode lasted 50 years. But what is more important is the identifier that it is carrying. And so the message for me is to ensure that we're using global standards as the identifier, because they are more enduring in the long run than the actual data carrier itself.
Okay, technology changes, but the information doesn't. Yeah, cool, thank you. Jessica.
Mine would probably be that data standards is the key to traceability systems. So for our work, having data standards to be able to integrate retailer systems, government systems, and grower systems is one of our key things for traceability.
Thank you very much. Michael.
In terms of, I guess, key implementation challenges faced, it's really don't try to reinvent the wheel. It is a complex system to implement. There's a lot of good solution providers out there, and leverage their knowledge and also their ability to provide validation services. So validation is in the pharmaceutical industry, and that might be a term that's not sort of well known outside of the pharmaceutical industry, but that ability to provide documented evidence that everything works and does what it's meant to do, very much leverages solution providers to provide that service to you, and then the whole implementation becomes manageable. That was really the key takeaway for our implementation of a traceability solution.
Okay, thank you. Paul, your headline.
think what we've discovered is that our supply chains are much more fragile and fragmented than perhaps the general public think. And 2DBarcodes really do hold the possibility for providing levels of insurance and integrity. That means that we can actually make sure that people get products they need when they need it, and we can intervene for levels of supply and safety when needed to.
So a headline?
That's basically the headline.
Okay, it's a long headline, but I'd read that article.
It's a long headline.
Thank James, last.
And luckily so. Look, I think in a nutshell, the headline would be "Meds must be unit dose packed with a barcode," would be sort of the headline I'd go for. I think it's going to be a few hops to get there. Not expecting that to be tomorrow's headline, but it's got to be where the vision is. And I think just agreeing with the other panelists here that information is power, data-informed decisions are where we need to move, and use the standards. Don't reinvent a wheel here. It's actually fantastic that it's a global trade identification number, and that I could actually conceivably in the near future get medication records from North America and do drug interaction checking and patient safety checks, because we're not arguing over how we spell paracetamol, which we and the Yanks do argue about, but at the core, I do know what that chemical is, and we can work together. We're not, just use the standards. Don't, use the standards.
Cool. Thank you. Look, if anybody who has joined us today to listen in does have a question that they haven't been able to ask, please raise your hand, and we'll see if we can. And the Cherry case study that will be made available after the webinar. But if there are no other questions, and there's one Q&A that's come up.
In the context of damage resistance, so certainly when compared to 2DBarcodes, 2DBarcodes do in fact provide a lot more redundancy in the context of their ability to be scanned. So because again, you're basically taking an entire image of the barcode as opposed to trying to run a laser through a number of different parts and spaces. The capacity for the barcode to continue to work even after a certain amount of damage is significantly greater than 1DBarcodes, and does provide you with that level of redundancy that anonymous attendee posted on the Q&A tool.
Thank you for that, Marcel. So I would like to thank our panel today, Michael, for both your presentation and for joining us on the panel, for James, Paul, Jessica, Brett and Chanel for your insights. It's been really informative. It's great to have such expert views and to be able to share real journeys. They're not theoretical, they're things that you have lived in your day-to-day work lives with real outcomes for us as both providers of products to the Australian public and as consumers. So thank you for your insights. For me, the overall questions, the things that came up with the clarity of the supply chain, the data density, the greater knowledge, the accuracy and the safety to us as consumers, but also as manufacturers and providers of product, and the ability to know where our products are. All of those things are going to make our lives and consumers' lives much easier. So thank you to everybody. For those of you that don't know but would like to know more about the National GS1 Traceability Advisory Group, then you can click on the barcode that is up now on the screen, and you can get information and join the NG tag if you can. Would like to. But to everybody, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for the panelists. It's been an informative session. It's something that is going to change all of our lives. I'd like you to there's a wide range of people that are already part of the NG tag, and it is making a difference to how we're carrying the conversation forward and changing the way that we view our supply chain, and not just as providers of products, but as a collective of companies and individuals that are participating. The more conversations we have around how do we create value in data and sharing with each other, the better off we as industry are going to be, and the better off consumers are going to be, the safer we're all going to be. And it's a great initiative to be able to spread the conversation. So thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you on future NG Tag webinars.